Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Professor Judith McNamara and I'm the Dean of the Adelaide Law School. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we meet today on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge their enduring connection to country, knowledge and culture. I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are here with us this evening. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's event. From decriminalisation to future reform, 50 years of LGBTIQA+ legal progress in South Australia. I especially extend a warm welcome to our distinguished speakers and panellists, our university colleagues and leadership, members of the legal profession, our students and alumni, and of course, members of the broader community and allies who have joined us. We are deeply grateful to the Adelaide Law School and the Division of External Engagement for bringing this important conversation together and for creating the space to reflect on both progress made and the work that is still to come. Tonight, we mark 50 years since South Australia became the first jurisdiction in the nation to decriminalise homosexuality. This was a reform born from one of the most harrowing and shameful events in our state's legal history, the death of Dr Duncan in 1972. His tragic and unjust passing remains unsolved, but it was a moment that galvanised advocates, challenged lawmakers and ultimately reshaped the future of LGBTIQA+ rights in Australia. We pause tonight to honour Dr Duncan's life and legacy, a scholar, a victim of injustice and a powerful symbol of resilience. His story stands as a reminder of the courage it takes to speak truth, to demand justice and to build solidarity in the face of oppression. This evening's program offers us the opportunity to hear from voices who carry forward this work. We are honoured to be joined by our keynote speaker, Tim Reeves, whose extensive research into the Duncan case, including his 2022 book, The Death of Dr Duncan, continues to shed new light on this history. Following Tim, we will hear from a panel of speakers who bring diverse expertise and lived experience to this discussion. The Honourable Lucy Hood MP, a strong voice for LGBTIQA+ issues in our state parliament. Caitlin Georgeson, an activist and campaigner whose work was pivotal to the marriage equality movement. And Valentino Esposito, a recent Honours Law graduate and current Supreme Court of South Australia Associate. Together, their insights will invite us to reflect, learn and engage in open and courageous conversation. I encourage everyone here tonight to listen deeply, to remain curious, and to consider how advocacy, policy and scholarship can continue to build a more just and equal future. Thank you all once again for joining us for this important moment of remembrance and reflection. It is now my pleasure to officially open the event and to welcome our keynote speaker, Tim Reeves.
Thank you. Thank you, Judith. Good afternoon. On 17 September, South Australia will celebrate its 50th anniversary as the first jurisdiction nationally to enact gay law reform. This process was triggered most dramatically, as you've just heard, 3 years earlier with the 1972 attack and drowning in the river Torrens of Dr Duncan, a University of Adelaide lecturer in what was then called the Department of Law. Since then, Duncan's death and the events that followed have been the subject of a memorial plaque and interpretive sign and are included in the city's Pride Walk in Light Square. As well, what is now called the Adelaide Law School features his portrait and story in its foyer and has created a scholarship in his name, which is quite wonderful. But the Duncan case is also gaining national attention following the 2022 Adelaide Festival Oratorio Watershed, which I hope you got to see, which was subsequently mounted at the Sydney Opera House by Opera Australia, and who will do so again in Melbourne next year. Meanwhile, a film version, if it could be delivered, and I've been trying for the last more than 3 years to do that without success, has the potential to attract an international audience. Much of what we know about Ian Duncan, and I emphasise that he was called Ian, not George, was detailed in my 2022 book, The Death of Dr Duncan. Unfortunately, a good portion of it relates to the unhappiness of his life. As part of an upcoming exhibition I'm curating at the State Library, I've been carrying out new research, not of Dr Duncan as the gay martyr, an epithet he would have hated, but the person of flesh and bone, and he would have hated my intrusion here too. I want to share with you what I've uncovered thus far, although it does follow the general tenor of his life as we have come to understand it. So, I have gone back to 1875, the year Ian's father Ronald was born in Christchurch, New Zealand, to try and appreciate better Ian's background. And I found out that Ronald Ogilvie Duncan was quite the dashing young man around town, a successful businessman and keen sportsman. He founded several swimming clubs and even sat on the council of New Zealand's Amateur Swimming Association, the cruelest of ironies given how his own son would die. Ronald was also a cad and a bully, especially in relation to his first wife, Mabel, a wealthy heiress. They went to Sydney to marry when she became pregnant with Ian's half-sister, Billy, and it was 1905. And this would not be the first time for Ronald. After Mabel petitioned for divorce, he took up with Ian's mother, Hazel Kerr Martell. Ronald and Hazel were living together unmarried from around 1925, when he was about 50 and she 30. This must have been scandalous in the small town of Waipara in Canterbury. When they finally wed, it was in London. Both their death certificates, while only precise in terms of year, had recorded their marriage as being in 1929. It wasn't critical information when I wrote a 1996 entry on Duncan for the Australian Dictionary of Biography. But as part of my reappraisal, I ordered the certificate only to discover that the marriage had occurred on 12 July 1930, with Billy as a witness. Hazel was not only pregnant, Ian was born 8 days later. I put my shock to one side while noting that Hazel did not register the birth for nearly another month. Was Ronald being as domineering of Hazel as his first wife and refusing, for reasons unknown, to marry until it was almost too late. Yet it seems Hazel held some sway in the relationship, for she insisted on the use of the second name Ian for her son. When I dug deeper, I ascertained that George was a popular first name over several generations in Ronald's family. I was able to combine this information with new material I had found at Melbourne Grammar, where Ian was schooled, which had not previously been made available to me. And I am grateful to their archivist, Louisa Moscato, who is in the process of digitising their records. There was a photo of Ian just as he was entering his leaving year, when he will shortly turn 16. The beep's not working. Here comes Tessa. I'll talk about this while this is... So this is a photo of him. This is 1946. Turn the bloody thing on, excuse me. I wonder if you can see him there. I'm going to help you. This revealed two things. Firstly, he may be a brilliant student winning numerous prizes and scholarships, and on his way to being dux of the school in his final year, but he does not look happy. As with all the photos that we hold of him, he demonstrably is not smiling. Secondly, he's had a growth spurt and is taller than many of his fellow students, but also in contrast to them, he seems almost unhealthily thin. He's got very narrow shoulders. There was a letter at around this time from Ronald to the headmaster asking that Ian be excused from sports activities, which is intriguing in the context of Ronald's own sporting prowess as a young man. Attached to this letter was one from Ian's doctor, agreeing with this request because of Ian's, quote, early medical history and of his general condition and temperament, unquote, and adding that Ian should continue the course of physical exercises he is doing at home. Taken with what we know of Ian as an adult, if he were a timid, reserved, bookish, clever, non-sporty, physically delicate boy, he may have been an easy target for school bullies, which could help explain why he looks as he does. Certainly, he admitted to a University of Adelaide colleague and his wife that he wasn't good at games, that is, sport, and was miserable during his time, and it was 11 years at Melbourne Grammar. I can only surmise, but I find it difficult to believe that Hazel, let alone Ronald, would have married, including at a registry office, when she was almost at full term with Ian. Taken together with the doctor's comments about his early medical history, I wonder if Ian Duncan was born prematurely, even extremely prematurely. The associated complications may have required hospitalisation, hence the delay in registering the birth, and contributed to a lifetime of poor health. Alternatively, he was struck down in his early years with a debilitating sickness. Although distant family members I managed to contact for the Australian Dictionary of Biography entry made no mention of this. The long-term impact of early ill health has made me rethink something I had originally doubted. Duncan's boss, Horst Lukey's description of him when he came down the gangplank on arrival in Adelaide, that he couldn't carry luggage well. There was another unattributed statement in the same newspaper story, but presumably also from Lukey, that Duncan couldn't climb stairs well either. At death, he was estimated to be 185 centimetres in height and weighing 70 kilograms. So he was slightly taller than me, but a good 8 kilograms lighter, which still produces a BMI index in the healthy range. But he was of a slim build and not strong, which led to him being excused from all school sports in his last 2 senior years. As for the issue of his temperament, this ties in with other information that Duncan was a nervous person. His tutor at the University of Cambridge, in the reference he wrote for the University of Adelaide, referred to Duncan's inherent nervousness. He was, the tutor said, quote, one of those unfortunate people who do not show up to the best advantage in examination conditions, unquote, confirmed when Duncan, who was accustomed to gaining stellar academic results, took a 2A for his Bachelor of Laws degree. As well, an Adelaide academic described Duncan after their first brief meeting as twittish. The person who was told this understood that the word did not mean foolish in its usual sense, rather affected or even fluttery, that is, in a state of nervous excitement. Either of these depictions would link with Lukey's story that Duncan, in his first full-time job as a lowly lecturer, expected Lukey, as head of department and a professor in his own right, to address him with the same title. What possessed Duncan to engage in such absurd and embarrassing behaviour and to continue it when challenged repeatedly by Lukey? Curiously, before arriving in Adelaide, Duncan felt comfortable enough to write to Lukey that the allocated 9 a.m. start time for one of his lectures, quote, will help curb one of my most inveterate vices, remaining in bed too late in the morning, unquote. Yes, Ian Duncan, when he chose to deploy it, had a self-effacing sense of humour. When he started work, however, a sense of entitlement as the Cambridge scholar took over. At the same time, I believe Duncan was also deeply insecure, a point I will expand upon at the end of this talk. From what we know about friendships that he had formed in Britain, Duncan was able to relate meaningfully to others in social situations. A woman from Essex who wrote to the University of Adelaide's registrar said Duncan had always spent his vacations there and he had a large circle of friends. As well, Andrew and Jenny Lidgettwood, while Andrew was a fellow lecturer at the Department of Law, had Duncan to dinner with other colleagues, and they found him to be a convivial guest. Unfortunately, as we also know from his correspondence with Dorothy Glover, the older woman who was probably his closest friend, Phil Terry, thinking about this, and who had the temerity to fall in love with him, he could be unspeakably awful. It was Dorothy who encouraged him to enter Cambridge University to restart his tertiary education, and who drove him there in her car. It was also Dorothy who knew he was homosexual but still wanted to marry him. Duncan's response was a letter of pure vitriol, likely fed by a self-loathing born of that sexuality. Another drink. But now I want to come back to Ronald, whom I have argued was overly protective of Ian in the book. Possibly not helped by Hazel, the mother, dying of cancer when Ian was about to enter senior school and Ronald was nearing 70. Her obituary in The Age, presumably penned by Ronald, included the apocryphal story that her uncle was a private chaplain to Edward VII. Ronald wrote other letters to the headmaster of Melbourne Grammar, one asking Ian to leave school early because he was displaying an inordinate talent at playing the piano, knocked back. Another asking Ian to receive a cooked meal at lunchtime rather than rely on the tuck shop, this during wartime, also rejected. And the third, accepting a scholarship that Ian had won on Ian's behalf. This new material confirms for me the portrayal of Ronald as being controlling, although the words of a nurse who cared for both Ronald and Ian with tuberculosis at home, of Ian's upbringing, she said, quote, Dickens would not have imagined worse, unquote, hint at something even darker. How did Ronald's abuse of his first wife transfer to his second family? And did it relate to Hazel as well as Ian? Or is it conceivable that Ronald and Hazel joined together to ill-treat their son? We do know that when father and son contracted tuberculosis around 1950, Ronald had to be convinced that Ian, who likely had caught it from his father and was extremely ill, should be removed to a sanatorium. Ronald only relented when the director of the sanatorium refused to leave the house until Ian's bags were packed and he came with him. Ronald, who must have realised that Ian's physical frailty would be a hindrance to his recovery, may even have led to fatal results, could not let go. When Ronald died around 18 months later, the death notice misnamed him as Robert, and neither Ian nor his half-sister were even mentioned. Was this retribution by Ian for his wretched childhood and for his father's final act of infecting him with a potentially deadly disease, as well as cutting short his tertiary education? The family home was advertised for sale within 2 dates of probate of Ronald's estate being granted, and there were no family photos found in Ian's effects after his death. It was as if he were trying to erase memories of both his parents. Perhaps he was happy to assume the role of orphan of independent means, although he was only able to take personal control of his inheritance, a tidy $500,000 in today's money, aged 25. Even in death, Ronald was imposing his will, as it were, on his son. But first, Ian Duncan had to recover his health. He was admitted to Gresswell Tuberculosis Sanatorium around August 1950. He was 20 and, as noted, just shy of finishing his undergraduate degree at the University of Melbourne. We have no further record of his movements until he departs for Britain just over 5 years later. His other referee for the University of Adelaide position said that the illness had caused a long break in his studies. Duncan admitted in his own job application that the attack of tuberculosis was prolonged. It was 7 years before he was finally cleared of it. It is therefore possible he was trapped at the sanatorium for some time, although the maximum average period of isolation then was just over a year. Alternatively, he may have been released. He was not held involuntarily, but still required an extended period of recovery outside of the facility. And we must not lose sight of Gresswell, for another important photograph has come to light. I wonder if you can see him there. This shows the dining room. Unfortunately, it is not dated. It must be warm as most patients are wearing shirts. But at the front and to the left, you can see Duncan in full suit sitting at a table, except he is not sitting, but is completely slumped in his chair. Most people seem to be posing for the camera. He looks away and seems utterly lost. We know he at least made friends with the brother of Dorothy Glover, but his only visitor was the family nurse, as his father was too sick himself to come. I now want to return to the dinner Duncan attended at the house of Andrew and Jenny Lidgettwood, which has been revealing on a number of levels. During conversation, Duncan admitted that he had never learned to swim. This may seem an obvious truth, but I had never secured the absolute proof. When I was working with Christos Trolkas and Alana Valentine, the librettists of Watershed, they were very interested in the way Duncan died. According to Roger James, the witness to the killing, Duncan made no sound as he was manhandled by his attackers, as he was thrown into the river, and he drowned silently too. Christos and Alana chose to see this as the actions of a devout Anglo-Catholic who was prepared, even eager, to meet his Saviour, something with which I was quite comfortable. The drowning song for Ian, probably the most moving piece in the whole oratorio, contains the lines, "Pray that I am rising, gulping and crying to God." But I have now confirmed that Melbourne Grammar required all boys entering the preparatory school at around Ian's time there, and he was 6 going on 7 when he started, to learn swimming and life-saving. He must have been granted an exemption on medical grounds, although there is no record of it. Did the family move to Australia not only so that Ronald could set up a Melbourne branch of his firm, but also that Ian could benefit from a more conducive climate than London? Yet his health issues still had to be carefully managed. And as a final point here, I still feel his fervent religiosity played a part in his death. But back to the Lidgettwoods, and specifically the date of that dinner and the manner of Duncan's leaving. A statutory declaration tendered by Andrew to the New Scotland Yard detectives is consistent with the suddenness of Duncan's departure, but states that the dinner occurred on 9 May, so the night before he died. But on my recently interviewing the two of them, Ginny was insistent. It was 10 May, the night in question. She said she had just finished clearing up and sat down to talk to Duncan at around 10 p.m, when he suddenly excused himself and left. Andrew agreed that his leaving was certainly sudden. It suggests that Duncan was not just going to the beach at the River Torrens, but for an assignation. Roger James, the witness, has always claimed that he did not know Duncan, something I accept, but the New Scotland Yard detectives and my friend and fellow historian Will Surgeon, who's here tonight, who is also very knowledgeable about the case, do not. Was it James, or was there an appointment with someone else, especially given the Yard detectives said there were reports that Duncan had been seen dining with a number of young men in the lead up to his death. He had brought with him the international gay travel guide Spartacus, which identified outside cruising places in Adelaide. Had he experiences of beats or cottages as they were known in Britain? That seems likely, given that on the night of his death, he left his wallet on top of the wardrobe in his flat at Lincoln College. Possibly he had been robbed before, or at least knew of the risks. And he parked not on Victoria Drive, but several spaces up on King William Road. He was being very cautious, unsurprisingly given his occupation, so cautious that no one even saw him enter the beat. Ultimately, Roger James aside, were Duncan meeting someone, that person either failed to appear, did appear but got cold feet or lost interest, or fled after stumbling across the scene, and never said so to the authorities. That Duncan may have departed the dinner because he was a regular, even chronic beat user seems implausible. No one claimed to have seen him there before. But I also acknowledge that in both situations, the brutal and criminal activities of the vice squad at the Torrens Beat were a deterrent to people coming forward to police with information. So for the moment, this issue remains unresolved. I want to end this talk with new and quite startling evidence about Ian Duncan that came late in the piece from Horst Lukey. He was quite heroic, working tirelessly to protect Duncan's reputation from the very outset and persevering with that mission almost up to his death last year. On being interviewed on radio in 2022, Lukey stated that he eventually had to go into Duncan's office to clear it out. This is what Lukey said, and the way his already deep voice dropped, it's clear it gave him no pleasure. I have never told anybody about this, but there were a lot of bottles of vodka in the drawers as part of the filing cabinet. So he must have perhaps had a bit of a drink before he went to lectures. What can one infer from this astonishing revelation? Did Duncan really only have a tipple before teaching engagements to fortify himself when he felt insecure, or did it involve any kind of activity he undertook in the workplace? Would this explain why he had to have so many bottles at hand? More than this, was he a functioning alcoholic? A fact that had yet fully to reveal itself, given he had been in Adelaide for such a short time, and perhaps would never have revealed itself. There is no record of alcohol being found in his flat at Lincoln College, but that could be information only in the hands of the police. And in 2022, I was approached by a former resident of Lincoln College who met Duncan one night at dinner there. This man heard that when Duncan's flat was searched, the wardrobe contained only a change of clothes, plus 6 to 10 bottles, empty bottles of vodka. The man had no knowledge of the office filing cabinet, yet the two stories fit. Full bottles of vodka taken by Duncan to work and consumed there, empty bottles returned to the flat, a process that potentially started during the 5 unsuccessful years he had previously spent teaching part-time at the University of Bristol, or possibly can be traced back even earlier. On this final note, I record that my examination of Ian Duncan's life increasingly is of profound sadness to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tim, for that thoughtful and deeply moving address. Your meticulous research and storytelling have ensured that Dr. Duncan's legacy continues to be understood not only as a tragic moment in our state's history, but also as a catalyst for courage, advocacy and reform. We are grateful for the way that you continue to bring these stories to light, reminding us why it is so important to reflect on the past as we shape the future. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, the Honourable Lucy Hood MP. Lucy has been a passionate advocate for the LGBTIQA+ community, ensuring that issues of equality and inclusion remain a priority within our state parliament. Lucy Hood is a member of the South Australian House of Assembly, representing the electorate of Adelaide. She is also active with the Rainbow Labour Group, is co-founder of the Parliamentary Friends of the LGBTIQA+ community, and a member of the Premier's Commemorative Committee for the 50th anniversary of Decriminalisation of homosexuality. Her work reflects a deep commitment to creating safer, fairer, and more inclusive communities here in South Australia. Please join me in welcoming Lucy Hood.
Thank you so much. I'd like to give a big namani, mani napudni, nainari Lucy Goodnato Hood, Ghana Mirina Nadlu, Ghanayata Tempinti, Natalia. In the traditional language of the Ghana people, I said it's so good that you're here, I hope you're well, and then I acknowledge tonight we meet on Ghana land and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. It is my absolute honour to join you this evening to reflect on 50 years of the LGBTIQA+ legal process in South Australia. I am privileged to be a member of the Premier's Commemorative Committee into the 50th anniversary of the Decriminalisation of homosexuality, which is led by my friend and colleague, the Honourable Ian Hunter MLC. And it is a great honour to be part of events like this that acknowledge this significant anniversary. I just want to thank the esteemed Dr. Tim Reeves, who delivered this keynote. And, sorry, Mr. Humble, who spoke about so eloquently about what was an incredibly sad life and tragic death of Dr. Duncan in 1972. So I won't seek to add to his account except to say that Dr. Duncan's death shocked our city. It revealed the cruelty of prejudice, and it became the spark for a movement that changed our laws and ultimately our state, with South Australia becoming the first state in the nation to decriminalise homosexuality in 1975. But what happened next? In 1984, the Equal Opportunity Act outlawed discrimination on the basis of sexuality, and it once again placed our state at the forefront of reform. Fast forward to the last decade and we see another period of change. In 2015, an audit found that more than 140 pieces of legislation that discriminated against LGBTIQA+ people, and this paved the way for future reforms. In 2016 and 2017, laws removed outdated gender definitions, gave same-sex couples access to adoption, surrogacy and relationship recognition, and a formal apology was delivered in Parliament. Later in 2017, marriage equality was achieved nationally, and like so many, I remember the joy of celebrating with friends and family. I am both a politician and a marriage celebrant, and it was an absolute privilege to officiate my first same-sex wedding a year later between an old school friend from Narracourt High School and her wife at the Wheatsheaf Hotel. I have to say the recreation of the Uma Thurman and John Travolta dance scene from Pulp Fiction was epic. Fast forward a few years and in 2020, South Australia became the last state to abolish the so-called gay panic defence. And most recently, the Conversion Practices Prohibition Act came into effect in April this year. This bill was a significant achievement because it sent a clear and powerful message that LGBTIQA+ South Australians do not need to be changed or cured or suppressed. They deserve to be respected for who they are and loved just the way they are. By outlawing conversion practices, we are protecting vulnerable people, especially young people, from trauma, mental illness and disconnection that can last a lifetime. Survivors now also have pathways to justice through Equal Opportunity Commission, the Tribunal, or in serious cases, the criminal law. The law strikes the right balance between supportive conversations about faith, identity, or family life and ensure they are not criminalised, but what is outlawed is coercion, suppression and abuse. I believe this is one of the most important reforms of recent years because when people are told they must change who they are to be accepted, it undermines the very principles of our democracy: equality, dignity and freedom. Democracy is at risk when discrimination is given cover in our laws or institutions. A healthy democracy protects its minorities, and if we fail to protect the LGBTIQA+ community from coercion and harm, we fail to live up to the promise of equal rights under the law. That is why I'm so proud of our investment we are making to protect and nurture democracy, investing $18.4 million in civics and citizenship education. A more informed electorate is a more resilient electorate, one that can recognise prejudice when it appears, one that can stand up for fairness, and one that can hold its leaders and institutions to account. Democracy is not just about casting a ballot every 4 years. It is about safeguarding the rights of all, especially minorities. When prejudice or misinformation take root, democracy itself is weakened. Ending conversion practices is part of the work of ensuring our democracy is not just for the majority, but for all. But progress in law does not always mean progress in life. I'm sure we all saw the headlines about a particular Crows player and the homophobic slurs. And just this week, we saw former West Coast player Mitch Brown become the first openly bisexual man in the AFL's 129-year history. It is heartening to see the outpouring of support for Mitch, particularly on social media. But as a friend of mine said to me, the fact that many media outlets had to turn off comments on the story about Mitch tells us there is more work to do. We know LGBTIQA+ South Australians, especially young people, still face disproportionate levels of bullying, homelessness and mental distress, and trans and gender diverse South Australians can still encounter barriers in healthcare, education and employment. Elders still carry the scars of criminalisation. And as Dr Duncan's case reminds us, accountability matters. No one was ever convicted for his death. And that failure remains a wound in our history and a reminder of why transparency, justice and cultural change in our institutions remains essential. So while we honour the progress of the past 50 years, and especially the remarkable reforms of the last 50 years and the last decade, our work is not done. The path ahead must be about making equality real in everyday life, tackling vilification and hate wherever it emerges, ensuring our schools and our workplaces and our health services are safe and affirming, and listening to LGBTIQA+ voices to guide the next 50 years of reform. On that last point, I am proud to have co-founded the Parliamentary Friends of the LGBTIQA+ community alongside the Honourable Robert Sims MLC and Michelle Lensink MLC. We wanted to send a clear message that LGBTIQA+ community has allies in the state parliament, listening and advocating for a better future. The story of LGBTIQA+ progress in South Australia is one of courage, resilience and community. From Don Dunstan's leadership in the 1970s to the wave of reforms in the last decade to the challenge still ahead. But one truth still endures, that progress is never automatic. It is always won by people who refuse to stay silent. And this is how we honour Dr. Duncan's memory. This is how we honour the trailblazers of every generation, and this is how we recommit ourselves to the future. A South Australia where every person, no matter who they are or who they love, is safe, respected and equal. Natalia, thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, for your powerful words and for the tireless work you continue to do in championing equality and inclusion in our state. Your leadership and advocacy are vital in ensuring that the progress we reflect on tonight continues to move forward and that the voices of the LGBTIQA+ community are heard where it matters most. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next panellist for the evening, Caitlin Georgeson. Caitlin is a passionate activist and campaigner whose leadership was instrumental in the movement for marriage equality. She brings not only lived experience, but also a deep commitment to advocacy, reminding us of the power of community mobilisation and the impact of determined voices working together for change. Please join me in welcoming Caitlin.
Thanks so much to the Adelaide Law School for inviting me to speak tonight. It's really wonderful to be back, although always a bit strange to be in a lecture theatre that I received many lectures in over my time. I want to start by echoing the acknowledgement that Professor McNamara gave and by paying my respects to the Kaurna people. It's really also very hard to follow the wonderful Tim Reeves and the Honourable Lucy Wood, and I'm really looking forward as well to hearing from Val about his thesis next. As I said, when I was a student, I came to a lot of lectures and also events like this, and I remember sitting in the crowd and wondering how I could be a part of the social and legal change that I was learning about. And through my experience as a volunteer with Australian marriage equality, I hope what I can add to tonight's conversation is to show that although change can often feel very heavy and daunting, the efforts of volunteers, advocates, and community more broadly can and do add up. Of course, the Marriage Equality Campaign is just one part of a much bigger story of LGBTQIA+ reform in this state and across the country, but it's the piece of the journey that I lived through, and it's the story that I want to briefly share with you tonight. I recently watched a recording of Tim's address actually at the 2022 South Australian History Festival, and in it he showed some footage of the ABC's This Day Tonight program in 1972, reporting on the death of Dr. Duncan. I had, of course, heard and read about Dr. Duncan and his death many times while I was at law school here, but seeing the footage of his body being removed from the River Torrens was devastating to me. It brought home how close in time his story was to my own and to all of ours. The same stretch of river where I used to clear my head during university assessment periods and that I walked along in the early days of dating my future wife was just decades earlier the place where a man's life had been brutally taken for being gay. As we all know, in the years that followed his death, South Australia became the first state to decriminalise male homosexual acts. But even the MP who introduced the first bill made a point of saying, whether he believed it or not, that decriminalisation was not a moral stamp of approval. Gay men, he warned, should not forget that they remained social outcasts. As I understand from Tim's work, others also warned that decriminalisation might one day open the door to same-sex marriage, something completely unimaginable. And yet, marriage equality did come. Not immediately, not easily, but almost 50 years later. And for many of us, life is easier thanks to the recognition that it affords. When I think about decriminalisation in 1975 and marriage equality in 2017, I see them as part of the same journey. Both were about people in our community wanting to live safely, authentically, and with dignity. And both remind us that laws often reflect what a society values at a particular point in time. So when I think about legislative inequalities, I don't think first about what laws need to change. I often think about our values and whether they reflect the need for change. As a young law student, I wanted to get involved in the marriage equality campaign because I felt that our values were not reflected in the law at the time. I wanted to help people understand that they were debating values like fairness, equality, and the dignity of queer people just as much as they were debating who could and could not get married. As a field organiser in South Australia for the marriage equality campaign, I was part of a small team coordinating volunteers, community engagement and rallies, all from our South Australian headquarters in the very apt location of Gays Arcade in Rundle Mall, which some of you may have popped past and got a poster from me. But most of my job was very simple. It was talking to people. I spent my days on phones, at markets, knocking on doors, listening and encouraging people to vote yes and return their surveys. I heard stories of love, frustration, and hope. I met couples who had been together for decades. They'd lived together through the time of Dr. Duncan's death and were still waiting to be legally recognised. There were tough conversations too with people who disagreed, sometimes vehemently. Those were really challenging moments, and they drove home the injustice of members of our community literally and metaphorically having to go door to door to secure our own legal equality. But although uncomfortable, those conversations taught me that change wouldn't happen if we only spoke to people who already agreed with us. Real change would come from patience and from listening and from conversations that were uncomfortable but necessary and got to the core of our values. What mattered most in the marriage equality campaign wasn't any single conversation. It was the hundreds of thousands of conversations that happened all across our country, in homes and workplaces and schools and churches, hundreds of thousands of ordinary people, queer folk and allies alike, being brave and having conversations, sometimes very hard ones, with the people around them. That is what made the difference. As individuals and families and communities, we recognise that our values supported a change in the legislation. And as a result, change wasn't just made in Parliament, it was made at a community level, and that is what compelled the legislative reform. As a law student, I'd studied how the law evolves. I'd read cases and debated legislation and sat in lectures about theories of change, but it was another thing entirely to see social change crystallise in real time before my eyes. When the Marriage Equality Bill finally passed in December 2017, I was sat in the public gallery in Parliament House in Canberra. I was next to my future wife and surrounded by fellow campaigners and friends and allies. Many of you will probably recall that when the Speaker declared the bill passed, the House erupted into cheers and singing, and the gallery and even some MPs burst into a rendition of the Seekers' song, I Am Australian, which we couldn't really get past the hook. Didn't really know what came after that, but we sung it with a lot of gusto. Rainbow flags were unfurled and MPs and politicians shook hands across party lines. It was really overwhelming to know that the law finally reflected the lives that we were already living and the values that we shared as a community. I think it can be tempting to use the phrase, "we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us." But when I think about Dr. Duncan and his death and the people who fought for change in the years following, that phrase doesn't feel big enough to me. The truth is that every generation of our community owes the last more than I think words can really capture. And we're here because brave people stood up even when it cost them everything. To me, marking anniversaries like this one isn't just about the past, it's also about the future and a reminder that progress is possible and that it's people and real conversations that make change. Each of us can play a role in shaping a fairer, more equal society. It might be through activism or advocacy, or just through the conversations we have every day with the people around us, because those conversations add up. Tonight, as I reflect on the life and death of Dr. Duncan and that day in Parliament House and the many years in between, I feel very, very grateful to those who came before me, grateful to those who stood beside me, and hopeful about what comes next. My thanks again to the Adelaide Law School for inviting me to speak tonight and giving me the opportunity to reflect on this anniversary. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin, for your heartfelt reflections and for reminding us of the power of advocacy and collective action. Your work in the Marriage Equality Campaign is inspiring, and it's a privilege to hear your insights into your experiences of the campaign and the impact of the decision on you personally. It is now my pleasure to introduce our final panellist, Valentino Esposito. Valentino is an emerging scholar whose research explores justice through the lens of historical hate crimes. Their work offers important insights into how the injustices of the past can inform and shape our present-day understanding of equity, accountability and reform. Please join me in welcoming Valentino.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you firstly to the Adelaide Law School for inviting me to speak tonight. It is both an honour and a privilege. Thank you also to Paul Babby for supporting me throughout this journey of writing this thesis. So, as I said, it is a real honour to be here and commemorating 50 years since South Australia decriminalised homosexual acts. That milestone marked an important legal shift, and there is absolutely no doubt about that. But as I argued in my thesis, and as Lucy has said, that decriminalisation did not translate to complete justice. And I say that because there were and are members of the LGBTIQA+ community who were attacked, murdered, and then victims' families left behind who still do not know the truth. My thesis is titled, "What Lies Beneath? How merely high-spirited frolics concealed hate crimes and why justice demands a royal commission." And this evening I want to take you through the arguments I make. But more than that, I want to tell you a story about law, about silence, about the possibility of truth. My thesis contains 6 parts, and I do not propose to take you and give you a boring, lengthy walkthrough of each individual part, but rather I will take you through my thesis in 3 different stories. These are the justice and voice story, the legal deficiency story, and the finding justice story. Just prior to exploring those stories, I will begin by setting the scene as I did in my thesis, the place where this all really begins, the beat. In the 70s, 80s and 90s, South Australia's queer community didn't have safe spaces. There were no rainbow flags, no Grindr, no pride parades. If you're a member of the LGBTIQA+ community looking for connection or just intimacy, you went to a beat. These were public spaces, parks, bathrooms, beaches, the River Torrens, the South Parklands. To some or most, these spaces were disgusting, a threat to public decency. But as I argued, the meaning of beats has been deeply obscured by prejudice. Where some saw indecency, others found what I described as a sanctuary shaped by necessity, not choice. The only place members of the LGBTIQA+ community could just be. And I think that's a very important thing to say and to understand. Beats weren't just about sex, they were about survival. However, as we know, beats were also incredibly dangerous. You weren't just at risk of being caught by police, you're at risk of being beaten, humiliated, and even killed. And as we know, you could have even been beaten and killed by the police themselves. And when these attacks happened, there was no protection, no investigation, often no proper classification of the crime, just silence. And so that takes me now to the first story, the justice and voice story. I had a vision that at the heart of my thesis was going to be the victims, real people, that is, Dr. Duncan and David Saint. There are, of course, many others, but I chose those two. And before I say why, I'll just reiterate what I said moments ago, which was that decriminalisation didn't exactly translate to complete justice. And so I positioned Dr. Duncan and David Saint as emblematic of two different kinds of legal failures. Dr. Duncan's case, a failure of the system. It exposes a moment when institutions not only failed to act, but actively caused the harm. Saint's case, on the other hand, is a failure within the system, where the machinery of justice was present, but was paralysed by bias and institutional distrust. Together, they reflect the full spectrum of legal neglect. And so we've already heard a lot tonight about Dr. Duncan, and I don't propose to go into his story again in any great detail. And of course, if I tried to do so, it would do no justice, not into the extent that Tim did anyway. But I will tell you about David Saint. David Saint was 41 when he was killed. He spent most of his days working in a chicken processing factory in South Australia. He had a knack for real estate, buying and renovating homes to become financially independent. On the night of 16 April 1991, after the decriminalisation of homosexual acts, David Saint had moved back in with his mum when he was waiting for his new home to be completed. He went out that night and never returned. The next morning on the radio, Saint's mum heard a report describing a body found on South Terrace with clothing matching what Saint wore the night before. Saint had been brutally bashed and left to die. From the beginning of the investigation, the police said publicly that David Saint's murder was, quote, a robbery gone wrong. And so again, like the merely high-spirited frolic gone wrong, the police used soft, almost dismissive language to explain away what were clearly targeted acts of violence. And that takes me to the legal deficiency story. The question here is, where was the law? I turned here to consider the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The ICCPR says that all people are entitled to protection from inhumane treatment, to equality before the law, and critically, to the proper investigations when their rights are violated. To ground my analysis, I looked at the recent case of Krikarek against Russia, and I made comparisons with that case to the case of David Saint and what the Human Rights Committee may have concluded in the case of David Saint if applying the relevant articles of the ICCPR. Sasha Krikarek was an LGBTIQA+ rights activist who suffered two violent attacks in St. Petersburg. The first occurred at a pride parade where he was surrounded, kicked, and spat on by a mob hurling homophobic slurs while police stood by and failed to intervene, witnessing the entire incident and failing to act. The second attack took place at an LGBTIQA+ community meeting where masked intruders violently assaulted attendees and one person was shot in the face. Despite overwhelming evidence of homophobic motivation, including verbal slurs and targeted violence, Russian police repeatedly refused to classify either incident as hate crimes. They declined to open proceedings under legislation that criminalised acts motivated by hatred towards social groups. Multiple domestic courts quashed their decisions, yet the investigators still failed to act. David Saint, who I've just said was found dead in Adelaide's South Parklands, an area known as a homosexual beat, after sustaining severe blunt force trauma. Police immediately characterised the murder as a robbery gone wrong, despite numerous indicators pointing to a homophobic motive: the location, the manner of the killing, the historical context of anti-gay violence in that area, and the widespread targeting of gay men at the time. Community members, including activists, raised serious concerns about the police's unwillingness to treat the case as a hate crime. Yet no inquest was held, and the file was placed into storage shortly after. The investigation was brief, under-resourced, and not revisited until some 30 years later, when it was finally acknowledged that his death was suspected to have been from a homosexual bashing. No charges have ever been laid. And so that brings me to the final story, that is, the finding justice story. The relevant question now is, where do we go from here? The blunt reality is that our normal systems of justice can't deliver justice in these cases. The crimes happened too long ago, witnesses are gone, and evidence has deteriorated. And in some cases, the police were perpetrators themselves. And that is why I argued in my thesis that we need a royal commission. Royal commissions can go where ordinary processes can't. They have broad investigatory powers. They can compel testimony, they can force institutions to hand over documents, and most importantly, they can acknowledge systemic wrongs, not just individual cases. Some might say it's too late, that we can't bring back the dead, and that's true. But a royal commission isn't about just the past. It isn't about punishing those who are responsible. It's about the present. It's about telling the truth, restoring justice, learning lessons, and ensuring this kind of failure never happens again. We've seen this work in the New South Wales recently. Their Special Commission of Inquiry into LGBTIQA+ hate crimes uncovered police cover-ups, cultural bias, and institutional neglect. It gave families answers. It gave the community a voice. It helped reshape how police understand and handle hate crimes, even today. South Australia has not done that yet. And justice means more than just decriminalisation. It means truth. It means reform. And I'll conclude by reading the final paragraph of my thesis. A royal commission is the only avenue in South Australia that has not been pursued to address historical LGBTIQA+ hate crimes, such as the ones committed against Dr Duncan and David Saint. Until South Australia establishes a royal commission, the river that claimed Dr Duncan holds him still. His life reduced to merely a high-spirited frolic which went wrong. And there he remains, a man who taught justice and died without it. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentino, for sharing your important research and insights. Your work reminds us how the injustices of the past are never just history. They ripple forward, shaping how we think about justice, accountability, and reform today. We are grateful for the perspective you bring to this conversation and for the way your scholarship helps us to confront uncomfortable truths with courage and clarity. We have now heard from all of our speakers, and I'd like to welcome all speakers back to the stage, and we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. This is an opportunity for you to engage directly with our panellists, to reflect on what we've heard tonight and to continue this important conversation together. If you have a question, please raise your hand and one of our team will bring a microphone to you. We kindly ask that you keep your questions concise and allow space for as many voices as possible to be heard. So please put your hand up if you have a question. And while we're bringing the microphones to you, I might start with a question from the audience. We did invite people who registered to attend online to submit questions in advance. So I have some pre-submitted questions from them. So the first one is, what do you feel is the next legal or legislative step in further progressing the rights of LGBTIQA+ South Australians?
I'm an old fart now. I'm 64. I was a gay activist in the early 90s, and I think it's really important. I'm not trying to pass the buck. I think it's really important the next generation of activists take whatever they want to take forward. And so I think it's really important, but I don't think I should be involved in that.
I'll just, excuse me, I'll just second Tim by saying that I don't think it's a politician to be telling the LGBTIQA plus community what they feel is the next step, and I think that is why we did co-found the Parliamentary Friends group with Honourable Robert Sims and Honourable Michelle Lensink, just so that we can be that safe space within the walls of Parliament and allies, because really it is our job to listen to the community about what they feel is the next steps of reform.
I don't have anything to add.
The only thing that I would add, and I haven't been in South Australia for a long time, so I'm sure that I'm confident, actually. I know that there are incredible activists and campaigners that are working here on issues that affect queer South Australians, but I'm not trans or gender diverse, but my sense is that we really need to be making sure that the law is supporting our trans and gender diverse queer community to live safely and with access to healthcare and safely, engage in employment and education, all the things that we might otherwise take for granted. I think we also need to make sure that we're not backsliding in any other areas. Marriage equality is something that we all take for granted, but you can see somewhere like the US right now, there are discussions about whether they might be able to overturn the Supreme Court decision that essentially established marriage equality. So I'm grateful that we are not there. We're not in the same position in Australia at the moment, but we can't take the hard fought gains that we have for granted, and we always need to keep looking to other parts of the community that need our support. Thanks.
So we have a question from the audience.
Hello, my name's Laura Grenfell. I'm an associate professor in the law school. I just want to thank all our panellists. It's been an amazing event, so thank you all. I have had the pleasure of teaching two of our panellists, and I'm so very proud. I want to particularly thank Val for his talking about his thesis, and I wondered whether the Honourable Lucy Hood would like to respond to his call for a Royal Commission into LGBTIQ plus hate crimes here in South Australia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. He might need to send it to me. Like any politics, I am a part of the Labor Party, and we are part of a team, and so everything has to be considered within that realm. But what I would say in terms of how we drive reform is by, having conversations about building coalitions and about having those conversations. And so by Val being here, today and talking about what he's passionate about, that's where everything starts, isn't it, with a conversation. So, thank you for your courage in sharing your story tonight and your thesis. And so I look forward to reading it if you'd like to send it to me.
I think we have a question towards the back.
Thank you. My name is Roger Vincent. I came to Adelaide about 27 years ago, and of course was not very familiar with this particular case, although it was broadcast around Australia, but it's now a fair while ago. What I find interesting is people, now since I've been in Adelaide, people said to me, of course the whole of Adelaide knows who did this job. And if people are saying that and people believe that, I think what's wrong with the law is the jury system that perhaps can convict totally guilty people, let off totally guilty people. And I don't know whether it's ever been thought that perhaps that should be looked into. I know a Supreme Court judge in Tasmania, I've forgotten his name now, when he retired, he said the jury system, he says, just doesn't work. Now, I'm a lawyer retired a long time ago, but got my degree about 60 years ago. And I've always questioned the jury system. I know I'm getting off the track, but it seems to me that this is all, this has been just set aside, a part of the problem with this case. Thank you.
I think a legal academic needs to answer that question. Judith, would you like to try?
Val might have some thoughts on that, I think.
Look, I don't know the exact details of the entire case of Dr. Duncan when it was prosecuted, but what I can say is that I think, or in my view, the juries do get it right 99% of the time. So obviously that's probably the 1% of the time where perhaps they get it wrong. There's all sorts of challenges at the time, and without actually being there or knowing exactly what happened, I'm sure that there were evidentiary issues amongst other issues of why they couldn't be convicted of those crimes at the time. But that sort of takes me back to my thesis and sort of the purpose I wrote about this topic, and why I say Royal Commissions is the path forward. A significant power of Royal Commissions is that they can compel witnesses to give evidence. And I mean, Tim will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 2 of the 3 Vice Squad members that are suspected to have been involved in murder are still alive. And so if a Royal Commission was called, they could be compelled to give evidence that they potentially didn't give during the trial. And at least what we'd have at that stage is an answer, whether they did do it, which they did, but we would have that confirmation through the Royal Commission. So, yeah.
I think that's actually a nice segue to the second question from that was submitted in advance. What lessons can be learnt from the years in the lead up to 1975 in order for us to bring about reform for the LGBTIQA+ community in 2025?
That's a young person's...
We're looking at the young people.
I was going to point to you and say, from a historical perspective, grateful for your views on the 72 to 75 period, but at least from the perspective of marriage equality, I really do think that it's about, the groundswell of community support combined with the actions of a very few brave individuals who put their own lives on the line, their careers on the line, allies as well, in positions of authority, who were able to bring bills in Parliament and really walk the line between being an ally and trying to get a broad church of support for the bill. So, I mean, that would be my takeaway, is that it will always be a combination of factors, but I can just never get past the actions of those very brave people who stand up when they stand to lose everything. But then combined with all of the conversations that generates around dinner tables and in workplaces, and that can really push the needle on these issues.
Just add that Parliament, in fact Lucy potentially will be involved with this on the 3rd of October, as having a reenactment of the parliamentary debates that occurred from 1972 to 1975. I've been asked to curate that. I think it will be broadcast. It's really exciting. You think of someone like Murray Hill, a member of the Liberal and Country League Party, who introduced that 1972 bill into the upper house. So brave, so heroic, but lots of other heroes as well. So it's a fascinating thing, and hopefully you'll get a sense of that. It will go for about an hour, I think.
Have a question here in the middle.
We have one here just first, sorry.
Hi. So this is mostly for Lucy Hood, but also for the other panellists. Recently there have been rumblings about a State Human Rights Act after the State Parliamentary Commission recommended one, notwithstanding whether or not that happens in this Parliament or potentially in the next Parliament. How effective do you think such a bill would be, and what measures can be put in to make sure that it protects South Australians from a rollback of our rights, similar to the kind that we're seeing in the US and even in the UK now?
would have to be honest, it's not something that I've taught a lot about on this one, so I don't want to kind of give a answer that's not coming from an informed place. But what I would say, and probably what Caitlin speaks to, is what we do see occurring in the United States is of a great concern, and that in my work, particularly when we look at the suffrage movement, we look at the rights won for being the first place in the world to give women both the right to vote and run for parliament, in regards to decriminalisation of homosexuality and the reforms that have occurred there over the last 50 years, that reforms aren't automatic, but also that we can't just assume that a right won is just immediately cemented into society, that it is a constant fight and it is a constant battle to maintain the rights that have been hard fought. And I've kind of been reflecting on this as well in the fact that we have recently released our report into the Royal Commission into Domestic Violence, and we see what's happening to families in our community now. And so you think about how long it's been since we had women win the right to vote and run for Parliament, yet we are still having to stand on the steps of Parliament and fight just for women not to die in their homes, or that their children die as well. And so I guess I would say that it's just that we can't just assume that reform is automatic, and we cannot just assume that the hard-won rights are also going to be there for eternity, that it is a constant battle to maintain them.
Hi there. My name's Bertie Jagersmar. I'm the current president of the University of Adelaide Pride Club. So it's my experience that a lot of young queer people can identify problems, whether that be healthcare or something else, but don't necessarily know what to do about it. So my question is do you have any insights on how ordinary people who are interested can help advocate for change? Thank you.
That's a great question. Lovely to hear from you. I was once president of Pride Club myself, so we're all around. I think there's an element of needing to sort of seek out those spaces and people. Like I remember, I was really reflecting on how did I actually get involved with marriage equality, because the office wasn't set up. I feel like I walked into an office and offered up my services, but I can't remember. But I know that I had to seek it out. So I think it is probably about seeking out those spaces. I was involved with the Queer Youth Drop-In, the Feast Festival, and there were people there. It was always about talking and finding out what people were working on and how I could lend my services, I suppose, or what I could add, how I could connect people to each other. I'm sure you know this very well, but yeah, it's about drawing on the power of community and figuring out where your skills can add value, but also I'm sure Lucy will be able to add a bit more on this, but being able to reach out to members of Parliament and representatives and talking directly to them, it's open doors everywhere when you actually start knocking on them. So yeah, I might pass over to you on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I guess it makes me reflect on, I grew up in a country town. I'm actually from a conservative Liberal farming family. I'm that strange person whose brother is a Liberal Member of Parliament and I'm the Labor Member of Parliament, and growing up on a sheep farm, so I'm definitely called the black sheep of the family. But I grew up in a country town where nobody identified as LGBTIQA+, and that's statistically impossible that there weren't people in our community who did identify as LGB. And so as I got older, that kind of reality hit me, that people were living in our community and didn't perhaps feel that they could be themselves. And so I moved to Adelaide. I was the first in my family to go to uni, so no one in my family had ever left our country town, and so I was the first to leave and come to university, and it opened up my eyes, it opened up my world, but perhaps it wasn't until the marriage equality debate where I had become a marriage celebrant because I wanted to be part of something wonderful. I was working in politics. There can be a lot of dark, and I wanted to add some light to my life. As a former journalist, I loved hearing people's stories and telling people's stories, and I thought that was a wonderful way to do it. But it really wasn't until I realised that people who loved each other didn't have that right that I perhaps started to get more involved and more passionate and identify as an ally, and because I acknowledge that I don't have lived experience in this area. And so that is what really drove me then when I was elected and had the ability to be an ally in a larger level, be able to establish that parliamentary friends group. And so it's about encouraging other MPs to be part of that and to identify as allies for the community and provide a platform for you to come into Parliament and feel that you have a safe space to discuss what's important to you. I hope through those conversations, everything often will just start with one conversation, that we can bring more people along, and so and create those safe spaces for people to say, I want to learn more, I want to be an ally, and we can say you are very welcome. And so our parliamentary friends group is very much our two co-founders, Robert Sims and Michelle Lensink. We are both part of the committee into the 50th anniversary of decriminalisation, so a lot of our work this current year is going into that, and we very much look forward to the work Tim's done for the reenactment. We very much encourage you into Parliament for that, let's keep these conversations happening so we can bring more people along.
Thank you. As we draw this evening's discussion to a close, I want to once again thank our speakers and panellists for sharing their knowledge, experiences and reflections with such honesty and generosity. And of course, thank you to all of you in the audience for engaging so thoughtfully in this important conversation. I also wanted to thank Professor Paul Babby from the Adelaide Law School and Tess Finn from the External Engagement Office for all of their work in putting this event together this evening. To officially close tonight's event, it is my great pleasure to invite Professor John Williams AM, Provost of the University of Adelaide and Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic of the Adelaide University, to the stage. Please join me in welcoming Professor John Williams.
Thank you very much, Judith. Good evening, colleagues and friends. I'm thankful to be asked to play a small part in this milestone event hosted by the university, and that is to offer a vote of thanks. It is appropriate that the discussions we've been held tonight have been on this campus. The universities are intended to be leaders of thought and urges of action, and places where people can seek guidance and pursue thoughtful change. And it is at this university, as we've heard, that Dr Duncan took up his lectureship in 1972. And less than 2 months later, he was killed, and is innocent victim of prejudice and hatred. As we have heard today, we've come a long way from where we were as a society on that night that Dr Duncan was murdered, only a few hundred metres from where we are in this lecture theatre. I'd like to also acknowledge, as we've heard, those activists from 1972 who were working hard and before 1972, and I'm not sure if he's here today, but Will Sargent is one of those people who... Oh, there he is. Bless you, Will. Bless you. But I have little doubt that we all acknowledge there is much more to be done. I was recently had the great pleasure to enjoy the Breaking Barriers exhibition at the Bar Smith Library, which has works that support this symposium. For those who have not yet had the opportunity to see it, I would encourage you to do so before it finishes on the 10th of October. Part of it is confronting, as it holds a mirror up to the way we were, and it highlights the fight that we have to be involved with and the things we have to do now. For me, for those who go and see, there's a sliding moment in that exhibition, and it's the letter of offer to Dr Duncan to come to Adelaide. His response where he declines that offer, and then subsequently telegrams saying he'll take it up. A sliding door moment, but a moment that changed this country forever. My personal interest in the death of and the murder of Dr. Duncan and its legal and social reforms have been followed my own research interest in public law and legal history. But as the director of the South Australian Law Reform Institute, it's also been my great pleasure to involve with governments of different hues to present to them a report with my colleagues to suggest 140 changes to the law in South Australia about discrimination, to present to a government a report on changing the laws of surrogacy here in South Australia, and to present to the government of the day a report about ending provocation against LGBTIQ communities. Again, a law that was reformed on the basis of that. I'd also like to pay my respect to one of those people who I think is a significant figure in this, and Tim would agree with me, and that's Professor Horst Luker. Horst Luker, those of who may have known him, a pretty upright and dramatic person, just would not let this go. When Dr. Duncan died, he had no one to stand up for him, and Horst Luker was not going to let this to be put under the carpet. I think we all wish we would have many more Horst Lukers in our lives. On behalf of the University of Adelaide and the Division of the External Affairs Engagement, I'd like to thank you for joining us with this event. I'd like to give my sincere thanks to our keynote speaker, Tim Reeves, Dr. Pending, for his powerful insights, his scholarship, his continued dedication to the legacy of Dr. Duncan. I'd also like to thank our panel for their thoughtful contribution, to Lucy Hood MP, the member, to Caitlin, thank you for your wonderful contribution, and to Valentino, thank you also for your insights and your thesis. The University of Adelaide is an ongoing commitment to diversity, equality and justice for the LGBTIQ+ community. This commitment will remain firm as we evolve into our next incarnation as Adelaide University. We will continue to encourage collaborations such as the ones we've enjoyed here with this symposium between the academy, the legal profession and the community. I thank you here for your attendance and your support of this event. And I want to thank all those who have worked behind the scenes, those which have all been mentioned by Judith. This brings an end to the symposium to a close, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you and good night.